Thanks, guys. And then I'll try this one more time, and then I'll stop being distracted by the technology here. Oops. Cool. So I have a sample agenda. I tried something new for this class by doing a survey to see if people to see what people wanted to do. We wanted to do a topic-based intermediate class. So the context of this is I taught a beginning Rails class a little while ago, and we have a few beginning Rails classes that we've done, and they're really cool. A lot of people come out, and we get like a quarter of the way to anywhere that I thought, because people have all kinds of questions. They really want to know about routes or models or something like that. And that's all cool, but we thought it might be more productive to kind of break off these big pieces of what Rails is and spend the whole class just learning about that one thing, rather than trying to go for the whole thing in 2 hours, because it's kind of a lot. So that's kind of the context for this. This is the first one of these I really tried to do, and so I started a poll, and controllers was the winner, which really floored me. So we're going to dig into controllers, and I came up with an agenda, but I struggled a little bit with thinking about the right agenda. So if there's particular things you guys want to dig into, we'll just add it and we'll just go from there. So first, I thought we'd talk about what I mean when I say a controller. This might be really fast, maybe not. And then I thought we'd look at a controller file, just kind of take it apart. And then I thought we'd just scaffold up a quick Rails app and write our own controller file from start to finish, and we can see how fast we get. And if we do that, we some more time, I thought we'd dig into some more advanced topics, like how to refactor controllers and keep the code clean, where to put that code, and how to use it. And then other advanced topics are how to have controllers render. Breakout of Rails is, Rails has a lot of assumptions and default configurations, a lot of magic. Sometimes the magic doesn't quite work for your situation. So how do you have a little more control over what's going on? Is there anything in particular that you guys were like, oh, I really want to learn this? Cool.
Well, I'm just curious because in the description you had suggested to read the first 2 chapters of that book.
Yeah.
So I don't know if anybody else has done that. Seems like, yeah. Oh, okay. Because I was just gonna say, I think you got through some of the scaffolding bits, so really have a controller up there.
Awesome. Cool. So I'll breeze. I think we can breeze through some of that stuff then. Awesome. Cool. So I'm going to. So if you want to follow along, I'm going to ignore Git, I think, for this class. But you guys should be able to follow along on your own. And I'll push this up to GitHub later, so you guys can find it. But just to kind of keep things seamless. So I have a folder here. We'll just get started. I thought the first thing to do would be to scaffold up some code. We can use it to kind of talk about how the controller works, look at the generated controller model, and then I actually want to nuke that and write our own, because the generated code sucks. Really, really bad in the controller file, but it'll get rid of a lot of stuff. So I'm going to do Rails new. Example would be a project manager app. I just wanted to come up with something with 2 possible models. So the idea is we have some projects and we'll have a bunch of tasks, right? Really simple application you could use to keep track of an office environment or your own life or whatever, and kind of a common pattern we have. So do the Rails new command. All kinds of stuff here. It's happening. Bundle install. I use rbenv. And when you do that, you have to do rbenv rehash after you bundle install. So I'm going to do that. And then I should have a folder. I'm going to cd into this. And I've got all the gems. If I did, it would take some time. And then here we are. So I can open that in my IDE here. There's RailsSchool.
You guys have done that so far, right? You guys have all created new subroutines and standard.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Thanks, Dennis. Everybody good so far? Cool. I use this was actually an issue in the first class. I use RubyMine, which is a pretty bloated and heavy IDE, and don't let that make you think you need to use bloated and heavy IDEs. You don't. So. And so Because we generated code, we have all this. Well, we haven't scaffolded anything yet, but we have the kind of basic Rails app structure, and this is a good time to talk about how controllers fit in with MVC. Good question. How do you connect to the Wi-Fi?
It's just voice bridge, and there's two of them. One with the Captain. I'm using one with the Captain voice bridge. Yeah. There's no password. There's no password.
So let's see if we can get the hangout going here. Moses Van has joined the call. All right, so everybody good? We have a quick thing. We have a simple app, and now we can talk about in general where we're going to dig into the overall app structure. Can you guys see that online? This is a graphic I shamelessly stole from Michael Hartle of RailsTutorial.org right up there. He's awesome. You should buy his book. It's a big scary book. There's a lot of stoppers like Get and Heroku and all this stuff in there. But it's really cool. If you kind of pop away at it, it really teaches you pretty much everything I think you basically need to know, and it's a really great reference to it. I bought an old version, and he gives them away for free online, so I go to his site constantly just to refresh myself on what the default kind of standard way to do authentication or whatever is. He'll have pretty sound advice for it. So.
Right, can you hold on for a second? Be sure to share that screen on the Hangout, because what's appearing right now is just a regular screen. There's a request to share the hardware diagram.
And it's not, that's interesting,
It's
okay.
not here. Yeah, and I can verify it's not appearing.
Can't I just, oh, desktop. Thanks, Dennis. Technology screw up. Can you pay attention to the Hangout and let me know if it works now?
Still not working. Still just showing that.
There's a lag.
Is it a link?
Yeah, there's a pretty big lag. I think it's working now. Do this and do that. Yeah, that should be working. Working for you?
Yeah, I can see you doing
Oh, you are? Okay.
Cool,
Sorry.
thank you.
pretty much.
Sorry for the distraction, guys. Okay, cool. Back to picture. So this might be old hat for you guys. Controllers are the C in MVC, right? And it's really where your kind of like application, I always think of it like routing logic lies. There's this diagram, and I'll go over it, but I always think about controllers are the things that handle requests from the world, figure out what to do with them, talk to all the rest of your application, and kind of honcho everything up. Right, and because of that, I think it's really easy for people, especially when they start with Rails, to throw all kinds of stuff in the controller. You can imagine a case where you have an application and you want to make a new project and you want to call an API to get some information about that project. It's really tempting to kind of throw that in the controller. And let's say you want to email someone that someone made a new project. Well, you can throw that in the controller too, and it gets really bloated. And so that's always sort of a bad habit to get into, and it's easy because they are pretty central. So the diagram, is pretty straightforward and standard. When people go to your app and they ask for a page, like /users, it's first going to go to the router, and the router is going to match that to a particular action in the controller. We'll dig into that. The controller is then going to talk to your model and say, hey, I need some data. And in this case, I want data about users, right? So it gets all the users and it sends back to the controller. The controller then packages that up in this thing @users, which is an instance variable that it provides to the view. I can unselect this thing. The view then takes that, renders HTML in a template, gives it back to the controller, and the controller sends that back to your happy user, who now has an HTML page. Any questions about that? All good? Folks at home, if you have any questions, you can type them into the Etherpad. So that's the basic thing. So let's generate a controller and look at it. So I'm going to scaffold up some code. I never, ever do this. I had to look this up today because most Rails professionals don't use scaffolding. It just creates this horrible junky code. But it can be fun for these things. So let's do project, and then I'm going to give it a name and a description. See that? Kind of, sort of. Better. Rails G, which is short for generate. Scaffold. Project is the model name, or the class name. Name and descriptions are the attributes we want for this thing. And this will generate all kinds of files. We could give it other things on this too. So. To my face?
No, it's not your face. Someone else who's in the Hangout.
Oh yeah, I noticed that. Yeah, it's kind of weird. People in the Hangout, turn off your video.
Can't do that.
All right, you can come back to that if you didn't quite get that. And this generated all kinds of stuff, which it tends to be cruft. Some tests, right? Migration models. It creates some routes for us, which is cool. All kinds of view files and controllers, and then JavaScript and all these things. So we didn't really care about that much, but we care about the controllers. So let's look at that. Cool. All right, I will stop here for questions or concerns or quick catch-up while we look at this horrible disaster of a file. I mean, it's just completely... So we'll walk through this and then we'll nuke it, and then we'll write our own actions and we'll see. Cool. So there's a few main parts of a controller. Let me see how I broke this down this morning. Yeah, cool. That's great. So first things first, you notice the name. This is called Projects Controller. This is a Rails convention. The name is simply a pluralization of a model called project, right? The pluralization engine in Rails is pretty smart. If you have something that ends in a Y, you want to make your controller IES. It actually works. If you have something really esoteric, it'd be wise to think about this before you name your models and things. When you're building your application, you do want to put some thought to names. I just built an application with a model called transaction, which was really stupid because transaction has a particular technical meaning relating to databases and is actually a reserved method in some cases. So there's definitely some pitfalls. Reserved words and also really funky pluralization are pitfalls because you want the pluralization to work seamlessly so your controller and your model are matched up and the Rails magic works. The other place that Rails magic works for controllers is in the routes, which is right here. And we got one line, which is resources projects. And what this line, one line right here does is pretty much auto-magically take care of this action here with routers, where if the naming matches up, Rails is going to automatically assume that all the 7 RESTful actions are going to map to 7 RESTful controller actions. So if you do new, what are the ones the clients can get? It's new, index.
First of all, do you guys know about the 7 RESTful actions? Yes, no?
Should probably talk about it. Thanks, Dennis. Yeah, let's talk about that.
So yeah.
Can we list them all?
Pause and talk about the 7 RESTful actions.
Where should we start? New.
And
A second, I just
okay,
want to.
sure.
Yeah.
Just toss it out there.
So update. That's 6. New, create, show, update, index, destroy.
And destroy. You've got destroy on there.
I got.
It should be in your scaffold. You should be able to see it.
Oh,
What are the 7 of which
index, show,
like
new, edit, create. I don't have edit. That's what I don't have. Where'd that go? I have not edit. Okay, cool. CRUD, yep. So CRUD is an acronym that means create, read, update, destroy. You guys have probably heard about this. And it's sort of related to this idea of there's 7 RESTful actions. Does anyone know what REST stands for? Yeah, I know. It's like representative state transfer or something, but no one knows what it means. We just use it as an acronym. There's actually a PhD paper that some famous guy wrote about the idea is if you're going to build web applications, you should probably do it in a RESTful way. And the RESTful way means that you build your application based around data models that respond to these 7 things, right? So everything in a vanilla kind of Rails application, including our project, is going to respond to a new, a create, an edit, and an update action. So those 2 are paired. Index and destroy. And that is going to be how we're going to organize our action. And by default, Rails controllers and routes and views are all organized around this kind of concept of the 7 RESTful actions. Any questions about that? Cool.
How do these 7 RESTful actions correspond to CRUD?
Good question. Yeah, that's a tough one. So CRUD stands for Create, Read, Update, and Destroy, and it's sort of used as an acronym to mean the standard stuff you're going to do to a database record. So if you build a Rails application that is RESTful, you will have CRUD, if you will. You will have the ability for a user to create, read, update, and destroy your database objects, which is essentially manipulate your database. So you can think of like a boring Rails application, which was simply an abstraction of a database to keep track of stuff. All you really need is CRUD. All you need are your RESTful actions, and then all of a sudden your users can do all this stuff. And if it's a smart enough database, it's an app, and you made a lot of money. So does that make sense? So thank you for that, Dennis. So hopefully this routing thing will make a little bit more sense. So this resources project. What this tells our router is that you have a resource, a central object called project, and I want you to map. I want you to, or this application is going to have route actions for these 7 RESTful calls. By default, these always get matched. So, and I'll show you how you can see this. But does that kind of make sense theoretically?
If you leave out one of those 7 actions in your controller.
Good question. Well, I figured we'd get to that. Yeah, I actually want to destroy controller and build them up, and then we can see. But so the short version, this is kind of complicated, I guess, but the short version is by putting this in, you just set up the routes for all the RESTful actions. So that there is now glue between our little browser guy, right, and the request in the URL, and our controller, which is what we talked to the database, and now everything's kind of all wired up. Cool. You can see what routes you have. Routes. And if I do now, we can get a little bit more information about these routes and how everything works. So can you guys see that? Kind of. So are there 7 here? There's more. That's okay. So let's start with the first one right up here. This first line. Ignore the prefix for right now. And look, we have a column, a verb. Do you guys know what the HTTP verbs are? Yes, no, maybe, kind of, sort of. What? You know, you just went through this. Yeah. You want to? Can you expound upon the HTTP verbs?
No. I don't remember that much.
Okay, cool. Well, we got to list some of them up here. Okay, get is a verb, right? Post is kind of the opposite of get. Get is to get data from the server. It's like, give me a record or a list or something. Post says, server, I'm going to send you some data and you're going to create a record. There is also delete, does what we think. And there, now we also have patch and put, which I've noticed patch is the new version of put. They both are for editing records. I think patch makes a lot more sense intuitively than put, which is really weird. So the idea is that every HTTP call, though, every time a browser asks a server for a web page, whether that's to log in or to look at the latest events or whatever, you're making an HTTP request, and that has a verb associated with it. So when you set up your routes, all of your routes also have verbs. The next column is the URI pattern. URI is just a fancy way of saying URL, right? And you notice the slash projects make sense, and then at the end we have this thing called format, and I just encourage you to ignore that for right now. This is useful if you're making a JSON API and you want to have JSON or parallel, but for right now your format's always going to be HTML, and you don't have to worry that much about it. And then in the final column, you can see the controller action that it maps to. And so what this means is that anyone goes to our application and hits slash projects, our router is going to route that to a method called index and just do whatever it says in that method right there. And in this case, it's getting all the projects. Does that make sense? Maybe I can show them both in the same view here. And it's the same with all of these other ones. Create, new, edit. You can see the RESTful calls here are getting mapped to the controller actions. Make sense so far? Let's see if this probably helps to run the migrations. Okay, cool. All right, the default welcome page. What happens if we just see this? Awesome, something happened. Do you guys any questions so far and kind of the basic, like do you guys understand what just happened when I just went to slash projects? The router saw the path, figured out I wanted the index action, and routed that to the controller. The controller looked up all the projects, which there didn't happen to be. And then it passed it off to the view, and we haven't really talked about that yet. Good so far? How are folks at home doing on the Etherpad?
So how did, okay,
Good
so
stuff.
I'm looking at the URL
Mm-hmm. Where are we?
in your, okay, there, how do I know that that's going to go to index for sure,
As opposed to
as opposed to anything else? There's nothing explicitly saying.
oh, because it's not like index?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good question.
That's like an old school question.
Does anyone know the answer to that?
Which we just didn't cover. Right?
Yeah, so Dennis's question is, okay, so you just put slash projects up there, but that's actually going to a specific,
Yeah.
it seems like a generic URL string, but it's going to a specific action. Like I'm not saying new. If I did, we'd get a form. Cool, okay. And the answer to Dennis's question, I think, is has to make routes. And if you look, the URL pattern with the model slash pluralized model name by default routes to the index action of the controller. And this is the case all the time. Does that make sense? Dennis, is that what you were, or something?
So that's how it works. Yes. That's how it works.
Cool.
No, but in part because I actually got tripped up on that the other day, remember? Because I asked you, why can't I just put index here? And,
Oh yeah, because
you know, and
you
because I'm
can't.
thinking old school.
Yeah.
Really, you need to look at the routing table
Right.
and say, well, index this action, index. It's like controller projects goes to method index, and what maps to it. It's just this. It's not project/index. In the case of new, it's like it goes to that new, but you can see it's clearly mapped to projects new. So this always has authority.
We good so far? From here, I kind of want to delete this. I kind of want to go over the file that was generated a little bit, but then I want to delete it and write our own, and this will give you, I think, a better, because then stuff will break, and then as we start adding things will start working, and you'll kind of see like how this adds up. Cool. Okay, so now that we have a little bit of an overview, back to this horrible file that it generated. Sorry, it's horrible. You'll see at the end it'll be much nicer. So the first thing is that the projects controller is just a Ruby class that descends from something called application controller. And that's the first thing to note is that this is just straight up Ruby here. There's nothing fancy happening. But if we look at application controller, we can get a sense that maybe there's some more going on here. Application controller is just a class, but that descends from action controller base, which is our Rails magic. Right, so by descending from application controller and then from there to action controller, we bring in a whole lot of Rails goodness. Any questions about that? It's kind of standard like object-oriented stuff, not too much Rails. And then the next thing to point out is that we have 7 instance methods all defined here. Can kind of shrink them up here to make them look nicer. And these methods all obviously correspond with the 7 RESTful calls. And you could put any kind of method you want here. You could do something like def crazy, crazy, right, and just do something. And that would be fine, but you'd have to do some manual work to have that be wired up. Rails isn't going to be default figured out. But if you define a method called index, well, Rails is going to know that that's the index action. Cool? Up top, we have a thing called before action. Anyone have a sense of what's going on here? Close. What do you mean?
It's the first part of the screen.
Close. It is. It's the first. It is a prefix in the sense that this is called a, it's basically just a hook where it says before any of the methods are called, so before index, show, new, create, blah, 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 I want you to do something. The something is a Ruby symbol that happens to correspond with a private method. This is a very common pattern in Rails, where you'll have a simple syntax for setting some sort of hook into some sort of action that's happening, and the argument you pass that is a symbol which corresponds to a method. If that makes sense. In this case, this method is just looking up a project and storing it as an instance variable. So what this line here is saying is before every action, or I'm sorry, not before every action, before these actions, look up the project and store it as an instance variable. You could do all kinds of stuff. You could do like before example. That was a good thing to do and quite common, right? Et cetera, et cetera. The whole point is of things that you can do in your controller that are hooks into like the life cycle of your controller. Before things are called, after things are called, and probably during. And these are they're basically methods that you can write. So they're completely arbitrary, and you can do all kinds of cool things with them if you'd like. As a general rule, if you find yourself doing a lot of stuff this way, I think it'll get really messy and kind of hard to manage. But it's really great if you have a really simple thing and you just want to check to see if someone's logged in. If you just want to, if you're like, just want to check to see if your user is associated with a record. These things are pretty simple to do there. So that's another big component. The last kind of big component of a controller are these two private methods. Yeah.
So these methods, is this something that you would abstract out to share among multiple controllers?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, exactly. And you would do it in your application controller, right? So you could do something like def. Right here. This is a project I'm working on here, and I'll show you a real life example of that. So this is an application controller. It's exactly the same as the other one. I have some simple methods defined. This stuff is pretty obvious. It's just, hey, send the person to the login path unless the current user role is super admin. You can think about it, this is doing what you think it is. It's checking the user's permissions. And what I'm doing is in the user's controller, I have a before filter called super admin. So every action in my user's controller, before it's fired, it's going to call this method, which is going to go over and it's basically going to deny the user access unless they're a super admin user. So it's very simple authorization implemented that way. Does that make sense? Cool. Last big chunk. These are behind a private keyword in Ruby. I don't know if you guys have seen these before. It just means it's a method that can't be called outside of the object. Yeah.
They weren't were they in a private block in the parent controller in your application?
They were not actually.
So why is that?
I don't know. Because I used a different pattern to do it. I've actually never seen the definition of this in a private. I probably could have put them behind a private in the application controller. As I understand, and I'll qualify this by saying I'm not 100% sure, this is not a security issue, although it seems like it would be. It's a code organization and API issue. What tends to happen is you have let's say you're doing something and you have this complicated library you need to write to perform some task, right? And you're splitting it up and you have this object that's responsible for this thing. Well, you might need like maybe 8 methods or 9 methods, like find the price, calculate shipping, call the UPS, blah, 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 blah. But that object for the outside world is only going to, there's only 2 methods that it can really call, right? Like new and calculate shipping, and then 18 methods. Those would all be behind a private. And it's more of a way to communicate your intention as to how your code should be used. Actually, the opposite. I mean, well, so if you actually can't call, so the private, you can't call those methods from outside without jumping through some hoops, and then you can. It's more as like if you're seeing that it's a message from the developer, it's like these are not for you to call. These are for me to call, doing something for you. So if you overrode that, and stuff broke, you wouldn't get a whole lot of sympathy from the developer, for example. But the public is like saying, like, oh, this is going to be you can trust this API. It's going to be static. I won't change it without documenting it. The really interesting thing down here is this, and this is probably worth some discussion. Does anyone know what mass assignment is? Oh, cool. This will be great.
It's a security issue in the last things.
Well, kind of, yeah. It's a massive security issue that's probably responsible for a lot of pain and suffering, and Rails was notorious for this in the early days. So let's say you have an application, and the whole idea is for people to log in and find the hippest party in the mission, right? And you log in, and it's like you just need a profile, right? And you want to tell people how hip you are, right? And so you're editing your profile, and it's cool, and it's like, I'm this hip. This is what I like to do, right? And let's say you're kind of nefarious though, and you're like, wow, I bet there's an admin interface for this application. And you thought about that code I just showed you, that super admin thing. Well, you could probably guess that this application, hit party thing has a users table. Fair, right? And you're a Rails developer, and so you probably know how the conventions work. And you probably know that there's probably an admin flag or a role column on that user table. Pretty good guesses, right? Let's say it's a simple app and it's just an admin flag, yes or no. You can't see that because it's not on the form, it's just on the database. Well, let's say this application was written poorly and they had an update action in their users controller, right? That just did something like, I'm going to write some pseudocode here, but it's like up. Okay, cool, that'd be fine, right? Well, the problem is, let's say nefarious user figures out that maybe there's an admin flag and uses curl or just Firebug to add an input element called admin and set it to true. You're owned right there. Because this would just happily switch that user to admin access. And that's the end of the day. So the whole point with mass assignment is that if you're mass assigning model attributes in just one big shotgun, you cannot assume that just because your form only exposed those attributes that you're not going to update other ones. Whatever you shovel in that pipe is going to get updated. So you better make sure that you sanitize what's coming from that pipe. And you never, ever, ever would just say, hey, whatever came from the inner tubes, I'm just going to throw out my user model. That'd be really bad, right? You could see also other kinds of really bad things if you were doing a financial application where someone had accounts, for example, with the user ID on the account. Someone could modify every account to belong to them. So, setting admin flags, modifying foreign keys, these are all kinds of things you really don't want to expose.
So what is mass assignment and what can you do to fix security?
Yeah, good. Okay, so mass assignment is a vulnerability that arises from a design pattern. It's not inherent in Ruby and could be
PHP.
That's cool. Our screen just turned off for those of you at home. But what it is it's a security hole that arises when you have a model with some sensitive parameters, either an admin flag on your user or a foreign key that describes a model relationship that people should have access to or not. If you have an application that allows non-privileged users to update some of that model, right? But not the sensitive bits. Let's say you have a form. It's like, oh, I'm just not going to show you the sensitive bits. But if you're just like taking whatever is the form, then your application is vulnerable because if the user can guess what the column names of your model are that are sensitive, they can send you a form with those elements included.
Yeah.
And then you'll just update your record.
My confusion is why is that the responsibility of the application, not the developer, to sanitize that individually? Is it like every Rails application allows that by default?
Oh yeah, so that's a good question. Yeah.
So is it like now they fix it by you have to do this?
Yeah.
So it won't happen?
Yeah, basically, yeah. So up until Rails 4, it was like, so what happened? So the answer is it is the developer's job to fix this, right? You need to be able to design secure applications, and it's very easy. You just have to pay attention. And these days, I don't think that's a big issue. In Rails 3, this was handled on the model layer, and you declared, hey, these are mass. You can update these attributes with mass assignment and these not. It's really stupid. It was really, really clumsy. It was really bad. And also it was insecure by default because if you didn't blacklist or whitelist attributes, then it would not work. With Rails 4, they did two things. One, they just by default said, you know what, you just can't blast a model with the parameters from your payload from the internet. No. Two, they said you're going to sanitize these things. You're going to whitelist them, not blacklist, and you're going to do it in your controller layer. And this is, I think this has pretty much eliminated this as a problem. And this stuff right here, this project params, is the functional implementation of that. So in every controller that you will have behind this private block a thing called, project params, user params, order params, whatever it is you're doing. And you'll do this. You'll do params.require. Then you'll give it the symbol of your thing. and then permit, and then you'll give it the things that are permitted. So if we had a project attribute that was like, super secret, let's say, and if it was checked, it was a super secret project that no one could see, if we updatable from the inner tubes. By failing to do that, we would keep that attribute secure, knowing that unprivileged users from the inner tubes couldn't hack our application to do that.
So Rails for every controller requires that you whitelist everything.
You got it, exactly right. Yep, and the syntax is kind of icky. I always just reference it when I have to do it. Yeah, and you whitelist to just name all your attributes. The symbols correspond to the column names, standard kind of Rails thing, and then I'll show you how to use it. So let's keep that, and let's nuke some stuff. No more. Whoa. No more ugliness. We're going to rebuild this up ourselves. Cool. So I'm going to restart my server here. And then what do you guys think is going to happen? Let's start with new. And I'm going to hit refresh. What do you guys think is going to happen? Any guess? We should start a pool. I should buy a six-pack and give away beers. It's not going to work. Good guess. No. Yeah. What's the error page going to say? Interesting. We got a different error. The error is saying the first argument in a form cannot be nil or empty, and this app project is saying I don't know what this is. And it's saying that because we don't have the method. You're right. I don't know why it's not. It's erroring lower down in the stack than I thought, and it's because Rails is being really Railsy and assuming the new thing. Rails sometimes gets too magical. So what Rails is doing is actually rendering the new action here without us having to specify new in our controller, which in my opinion is sort of makes it even harder to use.
Form's coming in, right? Or
yeah, I'm getting an error in the view.
Yeah.
So so okay, well anyway, enough about that. You're right, this shouldn't have happened. But let's fix this. So what's the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna do def new. Right? Cool? So far so good. And
Wait, did you nuke the new view as well?
No, I didn't want to but let's I'll tell you what, Dennis, let's
Or rename it something else. Just to show what happens when you don't have any associated view.
Thanks, Dennis. That's okay. So now we're really like,
You might want to re-look at that.
this is where my IDE gets in my way. Oh, did it change it to newly? Oh, good. Okay, cool. Even better. Thanks, Dennis. Okay. So, Vance, you're vindicated now. We took out the form. So this is where you would be if you just started a new Rails application and all you've done is your database model, right? You haven't really done anything, and you've done some routes, right? So we've got the routes. So Rails new project / new. I'm supposed to do something with this. If we do dogs / new, all right, doesn't know about that. So that's cool. But what it's saying is there's no action for the project controller. So let's give it an action, and let's see what happens now. Template's missing. And we haven't talked about views yet, so this is a good time. Just like, so I think of views as like the other half of that RESTful matching that we have with the routing file. Just like the new action and the route maps to the new action in the controller, it renders the view called new by default, right? And I changed it to be newly, and that broke. Rails is like, I don't know what to do. So we could do a couple of things here to make this work. The first thing is we could change newly to new.html, and then Rails would automatically render that file, which is just some basic form, and that'd be cool. But what we could also do is do this and tell Rails explicitly and override the default action and tell it to render something. I think. Cool. So it attempted to render the view. You can see right here, it actually figured it out that it's supposed to be going and dealing with newly. It still failed because we haven't done, there's some other things we haven't done. But does that make sense there? Why that worked? And if I take this off again, it's going to be mad because it can't find any view files at all.
You have to restart your app every time.
You should not have to. No. Your server, you mean?
Yeah.
No, you should. If you change model files, oftentimes you do, but not for controllers. What do you get?
Still get the action you can
Did you define a new in the projects controller?
Yeah.
In that case, I'd restart just to see. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you get a weird error like that. So if we change this back to new, now we don't need to explicitly declare that. And it should work. Cool. Everyone with me here so far? How the view files match with controller actions and routes? And we had a little bit of advanced stuff for how you can override that if you should. As a general rule, if you find yourself at a beginning stage of Ruby on Rails development and you find the need to override these default behaviors, you're doing something wrong. Still problems?
Yeah, no, it's because I put it in the project.
That would be why, yeah. Cool. So, so let's look at the error here now. It says the first argument in the form cannot be nil or empty. And that's pretty clearly because this app project variable thing here is nil, and it's upset about that. Does everybody know what this at means in front of the variable? Maybe? No? Okay, cool. It's an instance variable in Ruby. So just kind of basic, like object-oriented programming. Anything that's an at is an instance variable within an object. If that makes sense. So just like so if you remember, our controller is a class that descends from a master class, and these are instance methods. And so this tells you that every time Rails is processing a request, it's instantiating a new controller object. And when it does that, we get to create instance variables that are automatically accessible to the view. That's sort of the technical detailed definition of it. The simple definition is if you do at something, the view automatically gets it. View is this, right? And that will allow this line right here. This is the line causing the error. You can see it. It just wants an at project variable. Just by declaring that, this should take care of the error. There it is. Now we could change this to be like at thing, and then we could do at thing, and it'd still work. Except we got an error for. We reference project a lot. I'd have to change it a bunch of places, but so far. So what we're doing here with the new object is, so to back up, there's a lot of things that are happening, right? We're going to this request. The router's picking it up. It's saying, oh, I know what controller and method you need. It's the new action. Inside new, you can see we're actually building up a whole new empty project. Now I'm going to show you guys what's going on in the console here. This is interesting. getting our view. It's an empty project object with nothing set, but just kind of pre-instantiated. And it's interesting that we do this in the new view because right now we actually don't have anything. We have a form. But in order to make this form, Rails needs that empty object. Okay, cool. Awesome. Make sense so far? We got, dig in more, keep going, go back on stuff?
Could you just repeat that last bit?
Yeah, that's no problem. Yep. So go like 0 to 60 what's going on here, right? So when I hit refresh, my browser is making an HTTP GET request to the Rails server. The Rails server is saying, okay, the path is project/new. The router figures out that that should be mapped to the new action of the projects controller, which is this file right here. Ruby, or Rails, will then execute whatever code is in there. In this case, the code is assigning this @project instance variable to equal project.new. And to kind of illustrate that, here in the console you can see, it's just creating a project object. So @project.name, if you get with a Rails model, except it's empty. So it's doing that, and then it's passing it on to the view, which is here. You can see the view is just rendering this thing called form. So the only interesting stuff is in form. And then we're building a form for this project object using the Rails form builder.
In the Rails console, is there a way to intersect and pause the application and sort of see what's being passed around?
Oh, that's a really good question. Yeah, that's a good one. I was just commenting I'm not as good at that. There are 2 ways to do that. The first is the way that I use, which I only do because I'm not good at the second way, is you can actually watch. So if you do Rails server in your console and just leave it open, this will tail the server log. So can you guys see that? So I'm going to hit refresh here, and then I'm going to go back up, and you can see started get projects new, processed by projects controllers HTML, rendered the form right there. So you can see some of the stuff that's going on. And if you submit a form, you'll actually see where is the payload? Get. Okay, well, it broke before it logged it, but that's fine. So the other way, and let's see if I can do this, is to I don't have pry. So the other way is to use a thing called pry, which is a replacement for IRB.
It's a gem.
Let's just do this real quick. It's a gem. Gem is a pry. Do you know?
I can't remember. It's probably Rails and by skill.
In your controller, you can do pry.bind. It's super cool.
Is it pry.bind or binding pry?
Oh, yeah. Okay, I've got pry. Let's see if this works. Oh, yeah.
So is that the Rails debugger?
Pry? Pry is a replacement for IRB, which is the Ruby console. In Rails, if you do the Rails console, Rails will automatically load either IRB or pry if you have it set up, plus load all of your Rails code. So you're in a Ruby console, but you have all the Rails libraries that aren't part of Ruby, right? It's not necessarily a debugger. There's actually another debugger, but people use pry as a debugger, if that makes sense. And I am not. It is incredible. I am not very good at it, and it's not going to Good.
No, binding pry should work. Oh, you don't have the gender spelled out.
I did. That I did. Oh, I probably need to.
There it is.
Ah, there it is. Cool, we got it. So because I put this binding.pry thing on here, when I hit my request, see how I'm hanging here? The controller paused right here.
And you can actually start inspecting the variables.
Yep.
Right.
There we go. That's actually the app project thing that our controller just created.
This is the running application console.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's paused there, and then you can start from there.
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
So if you had like a really complicated thing where you had all this like weird state, and you're like, it's breaking and I don't know why, and I really wish I knew if this thing was true or false right before it broke, you would drop it in there and be like, true or false. Yeah, cool. There we go. And then I'm back in my log, and it let me go. Okay, cool. Any other questions? And let's add a create action and actually make it work. Sound good? Good so far? Cool. First thing, def create. You guys notice it's kind of weird that there's actually two things that we need to just make a new record, and they're both kind of called new. I always thought this was really weird. New actually doesn't make anything new. It just renders the form. Create is actually what creates things, but the users don't see create. So if it's also the same with edit and update. And if you look at the rake routes, I think it makes a little bit more sense. If you notice, new is a GET request, and remember that's asking the server for data. So it makes sense that the new action isn't doing anything to the database; it's spitting out that form, right? But then create is post, right back to the same path, and that's actually sending data to Rails, and Rails needs to gobble it up and do something with it, but not necessarily send anything back to the client. Make sense?
I'll throw a sidebar on this. So when you're counting up REST actions, it's sort of interesting. Whatever you want to call it. But you've got 7 RESTful calls.
Yeah.
Right? So 2 of them are dedicated to create. There's new and create. Another 2 are dedicated to update. It's edit and update. So subtract 2, you're down to 5. There are 2 kind of showish actions. One is just show, we just show one thing. And then there's index, which is like show everything of this class. So that accounts for 4 sort of, so the index and show correspond to read. Create corresponds to update and edit. What's what I left here?
No, update, update, edit, and update, and then.
Yeah, new. Yeah, and new. Yeah, but you guys know what I'm getting at here. And new and create correspond to create. So that's why you've got 7 RESTful actions, but only 4 CRUD actions. They do have some mapping. Yep.
Yeah, it is weird. So this is we have the other side of the pair here, and you get what I'm doing is pretty straightforward. I'm actually recreating another app project instance variable, instantiating a new project object, but this time I'm providing it an argument called project params. So let's do our binding.pry here actually, and see what's going on. Sound good? Project world description did project. Cool. Are you ready? Okay, cool. So pry grabbed it mid moment here. Project params business here. Look at that. what we have is a simple Ruby hash. That's the stuff from the form. And all I'm doing is taking that and basically making a new project with those things. So does the mass assignment stuff make a little bit more sense now? If I was a smart person and had the ability to add, you can see right here where it's coming from. If I had the ability to manipulate my form to add, admin or role to that, I would have just made myself a new thing with protected attributes. But because I'm using the project params, I am protecting myself from that. What you would not want to do is do what we used to do and do this. Will take the raw request and just create a new thing, and I think actually Rails will error on that. Yeah. So if you do it the dumb way, Rails will get mad at you. Forbidden attributes error, which is really good. So with 4, it's secure by default. All you guys are probably using 4, right? If you're ever in Rails 3, there's a gem called strong params that allows you to use this kind of controller-based strong parameter action in Rails 3. That was actually the original source of the whole idea.
I have a question about song jokes. I'm trying to
Hello, anybody there?